Yeah, Tim Wise, everybody, joins me. Just the man I wanted to talk to for so many different reasons, but I have not talked to you since the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And you have put out a tremendous amount of analysis and commentary about it, both at Medium, on social media, Joy Reid show, Don Lemon show, all the bigs want to talk to Tim Wise. And of course, so do the mediums. And I'm a smedium.
No, you're a big guy. You're a big guy. It's the big three. It's you and Joy and Don, and I enjoy talking to all of them.
I'm the show that's like a onesie. So lots to discuss though with you, but I guess I first just want to go to kind of the most obvious thing that I wanted to ask you about, given your scholarship and everything that you've been doing your whole career, which is looking at Charlie Kirk's life and his contributions and his impact and his influence. And one way to look at it in many ways is to look at the celebration or memory of his life, and by who, including apparently in every town, my town, churches everywhere. You know, my town is run by Republicans, and the town supervisor is also a man of the cloth, and it's just north of New York City. And they had a whole huge thing. The church was filled with all the Republicans and all the white right-wingers worshiping this guy, but anybody who knew him knew that he was as bad of a white supremacist as is alive or was alive, right? Like, what are your thoughts about his contributions and his influences and his celebration?
Well, as hard as it is to imagine, there are worse white supremacists and individuals than Charlie Kirk was. But he was certainly
But the way I measure it, forgive me, the way I measure it is by impact. So yes, of course, there are worse people doing worse things, including committing violence. But this guy was in my school. He was everywhere.
Yeah, no, in terms of his ubiquity and his impact and his influence, the way that he spread racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, nativism, all the isms, all the things, was certainly unparalleled, you know. And I think it's fascinating to me to watch so many people lionize him, who I think, to be perfectly honest, now some of them know full well what he stood for, and they're 100% behind it. I have discovered, however, in the last week or so, that there are a disturbingly large number of people who were saying all these nice things about him and really they haven't really looked at the clips that you and I and so many of us on this side have looked at. I actually wrote a piece the other day that was prompted by a few emails that I got, and then a post that I saw on Facebook from someone else I didn't know. And they all said the same thing. You know, the people that wrote me couldn't believe that I was slurring Charlie Kirk with these awful calumnies about racism and sexism. And when I presented the clips to them, you know, showed them the links, they were immediately quiet. They had never seen those clips. And then there was a woman on Facebook whose post I saw who showed clips of Charlie Kirk to one of her friends, who was really, you know, saying what a great Christian man he was. And the friend showed the person whose post I saw these very anodyne, banal clips of Charlie Kirk, just saying like almost TED Talk stuff like find purpose in your life and do good in the world, which, I mean, you know, okay, great. But they're not seeing, a lot of people weren't seeing the stuff we're seeing. People are actually not sitting and watching that direct 3 hours a day, which is the good news about America. Most people weren't paying attention to the 3-hour podcast. And so once you show people that, it does have the ability to make people go, oh, wait a minute, I didn't realize this is who he was. So I do want to stress, that doesn't mean we let Charlie Kirk and his legacy off the hook. We should talk honestly about who he was. But we do have to remember that some of those people who were out there celebrating this guy, talking about him as some, you know, good, just wanted to go have a nice friendly debate with the college kids or whatever, really don't know what we know. And we sometimes make a mistake. I mean, those of us on the left who are progressive, when we assume everybody's seen what we've seen, and if they aren't on our side, it's because they're just as shitty as the person we're criticizing. And the truth is, a lot of folks out there live in their little bubble where their algorithm feeds them only the things that it feeds them. And if they're not seeing what we're seeing, we have an obligation to raise that issue, which is why it's important to keep talking about who this man was, not as a way to rationalize the horrible thing that happened to him. Murder is wrong, period. It should be easy to say that, but as a way to say we don't whitewash and scrub clean the legacy of someone who said as many horrific things as he said throughout the course of his profession.
I mean, if you took the nice things that any of us that have said millions of hours of things, you could put together a pretty good thoughtful thread about a person. It's probably true of almost anybody who's ever spoken in public, certainly any politician and so on. But I mean, most of this guy's game, most of his career was very divisive, very misogynist, sexist,
Absolutely.
very racist. And he led a generation of Christian nationalism. I mean, like the way that he folded his religion into all of it, I think is important. So maybe just talk a little bit about the history and the importance of the quote Christianity that he professed and prophesied. And do you think he got raptured yesterday? I mean, not he. Did anybody get raptured yesterday? Did he?
Oh, I thought it was today. I thought it was today. Was it yesterday? I thought it. Well, clearly I've been left behind. But that's good.
No,
Traffic will be a lot easier in Nashville now. I'm excited about that. And there are some really nice houses down the road, bigger than mine. I'm just going to move my shit in. Actually, I think if they've been raptured, I don't know. I'm not really. We need to ask Kirk Cameron. Oh, but he'll be gone. I guess he'll be gone. I don't know. But the Christianity that Charlie Kirk preached, which is so funny. He's actually known for slamming most churches in the United States and most Christians for not being sufficiently magnified, for not being sufficiently dominionist, for not being sufficiently Christian nationalist. He's referred to Catholic seminaries as these breeding grounds for weak, effeminate beta males, right? And yet Cardinal Dolan the other day was saying he's the new St. Paul, I think, or St. Peter. I get my saints confused because I'm a Jew. What do I know? But one of those saints. It's like, this is a guy who didn't think most Christians, most self-professed Christians, certainly most mainline Protestants, most Catholics, were really Christians in the way they needed to be, but they're still going to celebrate him in church. He was not a religious scholar. He didn't go to seminary. He didn't even go to what we call down here in the South Bible school, which is the equivalent of seminary for people that don't really want to do deep studying, that just want the minister to tell them what the Bible says. He didn't even do that. His religious understanding comes from sitting in front of a computer, Googling what's the best right-wing interpretation of what the Bible says about abortion so I can say it. What's the best right-wing interpretation of what God said about LGBTQ folks so I can say it. And of course, among the things he said is that God's perfect law would be to put to death gay men, because he pulls out a line about that. Chris, it's interesting. The scripture says nothing about lesbianism. So, clearly he ignores that.
God is into, I've always thought
clearly,
God
clearly,
way more into women.
I think we all know what that's about. Yes.
Yeah,
but this Christianity that he was preaching, that these other American Christians are praising him for, isn't even the Christianity that most American Christians experience, unless you go to some reactionary, non-denominational megachurch, that has really taken the sacred and made it profane and turned it into a capitalistic orgy of excess. You're not the kind of Christian that he believed in. You're not doing the kind of Christianity that he believed in, which was a Christianity of power, right? A Christianity of dominion. David French had a really good, he said something to that effect in a New York Times thing the other day with Michelle Cottle and Jamel Bowie, where he talked about that. And David's an evangelical Christian, but he's talking about how for many years now, that section of the American right has essentially gone all in on power. They're not talking about Jesus. They're not preaching the Gospels.
Right.
They're not even talking about the kind of reactionary Christianity that maybe we ascribe to Billy Graham or to Pat Robertson. This is beyond that. This is something that is much more in line with the kind of thinking of Pete Hegseth's church, the one that Doug Wilson up in Moscow, Idaho runs, which is rooted in the idea that really women should be silent. They certainly shouldn't be allowed to vote. They rationalized the period of enslavement. Doug Wilson famously did that some 20 years ago when I became familiar with him. And he's the sort of denominational head of the denomination that Pete Hegseth is a part of. He had a booklet called Southern Slavery as It Was. I mean, this is a hyper-reactionary Christian nationalist dominionist movement. That's the kind of religiosity that the Trumpers, like Hegseth, of course, but also people like Charlie Kirk, were really into. And I think most Christians, all they do is they hear, oh, he's a good Christian man spreading the word of the Lord, not realizing that the kind of Christianity that he believed you needed to follow isn't probably the kind that most of those praising him actually follow. It's certainly, not the most prominent kind.
Very well said on the issue of religion and the fact that people don't realize how much he was forcing every other church to be a lot more extreme. And he had so much influence. I think it's really worth mentioning, which is why immediately when I found out he was assassinated, I was like, he's going to be way more powerful now. This is horrible for the non-MAGA movement. This is horrible for progressives. This is horrible for those of us that want to live on Earth One. This is bad.
Which is one of the reasons that I knew that we didn't do it, meaning any organized left activist type movement, because nobody on the left, and Greg Gutfeld even had a moment of rationality early on. Of course, it's left him since, but early on, he said, I'm wondering about this because, the left doesn't benefit from this. So I'm wondering, would it be the left? And it was a good question for him to ask, because no, the organized left, no one who is truly connected to a progressive or left or even liberal politic would think that murdering Charlie Kirk was a good idea. Now, let's say, first of all, it's a moral abomination to do what Tyler Robinson apparently did, but it's also a strategic idiocy. And so no one on the left would have done it, knowing full well that it would result in the kind of backlash that we are seeing, where you've got people like, Nazi Ferratu, Stephen Miller, calling for a crackdown on the entire left, the illegalization essentially of the Democratic Party. And he's cribbing speech notes from Goebbels yesterday, which is just absolutely fascinating. We would have known that. None of us would have done it, which is why when you look at Tyler Robinson, you realize, this is a guy, and I do want to also say, for those who think he was a groyper or a right-winger, that's also nonsense. There's no evidence for it, and it's actually a little embarrassing that people on the left keep saying it, because it's just as much motivated reasoning as what the right is doing. But what we do know about him is that at best, Tyler Robinson had this ill-formed, nascent sort of germ of a liberalism, specifically around LGBTQ issues, presumably because his partner's trans, and he just didn't like Charlie Kirk, as he put it, spreading hate. He just couldn't stand that anymore. That's not a politic in any broad sense of the word, and he wasn't connected to anyone. If this guy had even visited left-wing websites, you think Kash Patel wouldn't have told us that by now? He would have said that the very first day, and certainly since then, if they had found any evidence. They've looked at his computer, they've scrubbed all his digital technology, and I guarantee you, if there were any evidence, they would have said it. What this guy was an individual who, I believe, quite honestly, was not acting on the basis of any deep political motive. I think the more likely scenario is he was really in love with his partner, and he was really hurt, personally aggrieved by the way Charlie Kirk spoke about trans folk, which was horrible and cruel and vicious. And he personally decided, you know what, I'm going to be that white knight. I'm going to stand up for my partner, who I love, and the community of which my partner is a part. And it's a horrible way to do your politic. It's a horrible way to stand up against transphobia. But that's the kind of thing that a hyper individualistic Utahn raised in gun culture by conservative, that's the kind of person that says, I'm going to be the rugged individual who's going to go out there and make this stand. If he'd been on the left, if he had stayed at Utah State instead of leaving after one semester, the irony is, rather than being brainwashed into leftism, or whatever Megyn Kelly said, and whatever the Real World host, Rachel Campos Duffy or whatever, said on Fox, that he'd be brainwashed at school. No, if he'd stayed in college, he would have possibly found a community of liberal and progressive people, because there are progressive students on those campuses in Utah. I've spoken out there. He would have found a community where they could have channeled his budding, maybe liberalism or rejection of MAGAism into actual, they could have said, hey, do you want to go pass out flyers at Charlie Kirk's event? You want to go do a table and do a sit-in or a teach-in or something? But because he didn't have that, and he was deeply in love with his partner, he did sort of it's almost the Dog Day Afternoon scenario, right? You remember the film with Al Pacino, where the whole thing, robbing the bank, was all about getting money for his partner's gender confirmation surgery. And so it's a deeply personal motivation. It's got, and it wouldn't be political at all, except in a society where we're trying to politicize trans identity and make it such a horrible thing. If you even acknowledge trans people, there's nothing radical or political about who you love, unless other people decide to make it radical and political. And so I don't think this is politics at all. They're not going to find any connection. And we all knew, I think, as soon as it happened, who it wasn't. And I think the fact that the other side is trying to turn it into this Antifa thing, which they still can't pronounce.
Well,
I don't even get me started on the mispronunciation of that. It's not that. It's not, any of the usual suspects, but they're going to try and tar us with it in spite of the fact that there's just no evidence.
You have this great thread that you, I guess, posted on Twitter, and the thread reader has unrolled it. Is that what they say? Where you had a whole bunch, some basically 29 tweets in all, and people should read it. A lot of what Tim just said, he wrote there, and I'm seeing it resonate with people in the live chat about the complexities around this shooter and why it's so minimizing to make it be left or right.
It's neither.
It's neither. And I think that people can't get their head around that because we need everything to be a binary. We need to know whose team we're on. And to a certain extent, that's how we feel safe, I guess, or righteous. And that's a dumb way to be. But furthermore, media and politicians use that kind of binary to help message. But and obviously that's exactly what they're doing by, they used it to fire Jimmy Kimmel. They used it to fire all kinds of people that we'll never know their names across this country who commented, and they're using it for censorship and to promote the kind of media they do like. It's all about that. And the only way to do that is to say he's a person of the left. What did you make, just real quick, of Charlie Kirk's funeral, where it was all that kind of right-wing Christian nationalism up until the politicians and media commentators came on? And then Trump was just like, Charlie Kirk's widow thoughtfully Christian-like forgave the shooter, which I thought was a very, very important thing to do. Right. And, of course, reminds us of those victims' families, 9 of them in the Charleston church shooting, doing just the same. That's what you're supposed to do. But then right after that, our Mad King came on and was like, I hate these people. I hate them. Right. They're animals.
Right. And then talks about Joe Biden again and makes fun of his health, which you're not supposed to do, I thought. But yeah, no, I mean, it was that service, whatever that was a combination of all the worst elements of American culture. It was hyper capitalism because it was this marketed thing. It was very much, rooted in the notion of marketing and sort of mega church Christianity and reactionary fascist politics. All of them coming together. It was essentially a Nuremberg rally for Donald Trump. And I think it's a really shitty way to honor someone that you care about. I think it's actually really a slap in the face to oddly enough, Charlie Kirk's family, and maybe even to him. Maybe he would have appreciated it because he might have been that kind of guy that would have loved that kind of send off. I'd like to think not. I would like to think that we could be solemn in a moment like this and not turn this into just another rally. But that's who Donald Trump is. That's who the entire side that they are. That's who those figures are, and that's what they're about. They never are going to let a tragedy go to waste, and they're going to make it political, even when, again, the evidence doesn't just indicate that it's political. I should also point out, in addition to the thread on Twitter, I actually wrote a full piece on Medium with that same theme about the sort of personal motivation of the shooter as opposed to a political one. So if folks want to read that on Medium, they can do that as well. I do think there's another thing I wanted to mention, though, that I haven't had a chance to talk about except with Joy last night. It strikes me as interesting that this happened in Utah, and it strikes me as interesting that no one was thinking to themselves, this is an outdoor rally, sort of a vulnerable place. There's lots of buildings. Maybe we ought to check the roof lines. Because I guarantee you, if this had been at the University of Chicago, Pete, if this had been at a campus in New York City, if this had been at a campus in Los Angeles, if this had been in a campus in any urban area where most of the people around there would have been the liberal and progressive folks that he loves to debate with so much, supposedly, if it had been black and brown folks disproportionately, they would have searched every rooftop. What's the irony of that? And anyone who denies that's just being ridiculous. We all know that's true. There would have been much greater security protocols, but they were in Utah, and they probably looked around and said, oh, it's fine. It's Utah. They all love Charlie here. It's no big deal. And so, in a way, in a very sick and ironic way, the privilege of whiteness, once again, or the presumption of white innocence, the presumption of white nonviolence, of white placidity, has gotten somebody killed. That's awfully ironic. because if he'd been willing to go into those urban areas that he liked to slam and critique as hellholes, if he'd been willing to actually go into a place where it wasn't, 10-1 people like him or 5-1 people like him, if he'd been willing to go into a place and actually quote unquote debate a group of people who outnumbered him and who were steeped in some cases in the kind of factual information needed to rebut his nonsense, he would probably still be alive today. Nobody would have shot him for one of those groups, and B, they would have made damn sure there wasn't anybody on the roof ready to snipe. So it's just sort of fascinating that in the midst of this horrible act of white on white crime, we aren't even paying attention to the reality that it was precisely the whiteness of the space, of the state, of the campus, of the culture that probably most let Charlie Kirk down. Now, isn't that something?
I'm just going to let that sit there because it certainly is such an important point. I'm really glad that you pivoted to it, because I think I was going to forget about that one. And important. And you can read a lot of this again at timjwise.medium.com. I'll put that in the live chat. But if you're listening on the podcast and you're not subscribed, and you can support Tim on Patreon. Also, Tim, you wrote a piece there called Charlie Kirk's Debate Me Bro Act Wasn't Politics the Right Way, which is, I think, a reaction to Ezra Klein, his piece in the New York Times and so on. I made the point that he was an effective debater, and listeners, I did it at our hangout, and people jumped all over me, and I didn't realize how wrong I was. So I think this is another important point, not as important as the three that you just made or more about Charlie Kirk and everything else, which is really important. But I do think that we're seeing so much of this. I mean, Charlie Kirk got famous when he was like 18 for posting clips, I believe, and he was one of the first, he and Ben Shapiro and a lot on the right, the left is caught up to a certain extent, where they're like, Pete Dominick destroys Tim Wise. When then they get a thesaurus and it's like, I got to think of a few more, obliterates. And he did that, and he really got popular by doing that. So tell us more specifically about your criticism of Ezra Klein's piece and the rest.
Well, I mean, I just think Ezra was giving Charlie Kirk an awful lot of credit for being this open-minded Socratic figure. I mean, Charlie Kirk was going onto campuses and dunking on college freshmen who haven't even probably had a class yet in the subject matter that Charlie Kirk is going to want to talk about. And then he would just sort of dazzle them with bullshit and throw as many things against the wall as possible. If you actually ever watch his technique, as soon as he's asked a question or challenge, he immediately pivots to some other topic that he wants to talk about. He doesn't stick on the topic. He shifts the discussion to make it seem as if he is somehow overwhelming the other side. And I say this as somebody with a long history of debate, both competitive and political. I debated Dinesh D'Souza 8 or 9 times. I've debated Ward Connerly. I've debated David Brooks. I've debated a lot of people on the far right and just sort of average everyday conservatives. I used to go around campuses doing it all the time. And after a while, what I realized was, even if you're doing the debate the right way, and I say Charlie Kirk wasn't, because he wasn't really having debates. He was having, prove me wrong. I'm going to give you 20 seconds at the microphone, and then I'm going to dunk on you, and we're going to move. That's not a debate. That's a performance. That's some kind of reactionary MAGA performance art. But even if you did the debate the right way, put Charlie on a stage with me or some other progressive who's used to doing debates, it's still a problem. And the reason I say it's a problem in that essay is, having done it for years, I came to realize a couple things. Number one, no one really pays attention no one's looking to come to those to learn. No one's coming to be challenged. No one's really open to the possibility that their side could be wrong. And if you're going to be involved in a debate or watch one, and you're not open to the possibility that you might learn something on a topic that might shift your opinion, then you're not really there in good faith. And what would happen is, like, Dinesh and I would go and debate, and his people would come and my people would come, and they would all go home and they'd be in the same corner they were before. It didn't matter that, like, of those, I think I debated him 9 times. 8 of those times, I'm not trying to be a jackass when I say this, I'm just good at debate, I clobbered him 8 of the 9. The one time we had like a draw because it was just very low energy for both of us. It was like 100 people in the room. Nobody seemed to give a shit, so you couldn't pick a winner in that one. But every single time, I mean, there was a time at the University of Oregon School of Law where I just wiped the floor with Dinesh D'Souza. And that's not really a brag because it's not that hard. But after it was over with, people on his side came up And I was listening. I was talking to some of my side, and he was talking to some of his side, and I overheard some of his people say to him, why do you come and do these? And he said, well, I want to come and support conservatives who are under attack from the left on these campuses. And one of the guys is like, just don't, just, you're not helping, you know. But here's the problem. Do you think that guy, did he then come over to me and say, wow, you know, you really changed my mind about affirmative action, I'm going to really rethink? No, he didn't do that. That guy went home thinking to himself, well, I know I'm right. Dinesh just isn't a good spokesperson for my, what is the purpose of that? It's a pissing contest.
Right.
So when I say in that piece, I am a believer in dialogue. I am a believer in having conversations, but there's a difference between a debate, which is inherently about scoring points. And in this viral age, that's all Charlie Kirk was trying to do. He's got his people there recording and trying to find the best clickbait viral clip that he can pull out of the interaction, get rid of all the parts where maybe the other side got the better of him, where the 19-year-old college student got the better of him. And it happened quite often, but he didn't want to show you those pieces, right? In this day and age, debates are just about that. Whereas a dialogue would be a lot less adversarial. I propose in the piece that we ought to sit on a stage, people on the left and people on the right, and have a conversation not about what we think, because that is inherently adversarial, and that's me pulling out evidence and you pulling out evidence, and nobody really ever shifts. I want to know why people think what they think. I may have told you this story before. Years ago, Cal State, it was UC Santa Barbara, asked me if I would, there were some people there, wanted me to debate Ben Shapiro. And I said, I'm not in, this is long after I'd stopped doing these debates. I said, I'm not going to do a debate with Ben, but if you want to go back to Ben's people and ask them, hey, Tim would like to have a dialogue, and here are the ground rules. We will not be, we're going to talk about, white privilege or whatever. Is it real? Is it not? But it's not going to be me trying to prove it and him trying to debunk it. It's going to be me saying, hey, look, I believe in it, and here's why. And he's going to say he doesn't, and here's why. And the rule is you can't refer to studies, statistics, data, academic analysis, because that ain't why you believe what you believe, Ben. And that ain't why I believe what I believe. I believe what I believe, and he believes what he believes, and all of us believe what we believe, not because of some objective analysis. We haven't sat down and read all the research, studied all the books, gotten all the information. We believe what we believe because of a combination of upbringing and experiences, who came into our lives, what things did we see growing up, and what did we not see. My belief in the thing called white privilege and institutional white supremacy is because I've seen it in action deployed against people that I love. I've experienced the privilege piece on my own end viscerally. So yeah, can I find data to support that? Yes, but that's not why I believe it. It helps fill in the gaps of my knowledge, but I believe it because I've experienced it. And my guess is people on the right don't believe in it because they've had a different set of experiences. They didn't have the same friends. They weren't in the same social circles. They didn't have the same parents. They didn't have the same mentors. If we could have dialogues like that, probably nobody's going to change their mind, but at least I would understand where you're coming from. You would understand where I'm coming from, and that would humanize both of us in the eyes of the other and anyone in the audience. And that right there turns down the temperature in this incredibly divided age, so that even if we don't agree, I don't have to assume that you're evil for not seeing the world the way I see it. And you don't have to assume that I'm evil for not seeing it the way you're seeing it. And the problem is, when I offered that to UC Santa Barbara, I can't remember whether it was the school or they went to Ben and he had no interest, but it never went anywhere, because I think there are people who would rather just have the viral clickbait moment. They don't want the nuanced conversation. They don't want the deeper discussion where we really get into the, like, who are we and why do we believe what we believe? We just want to have the pissing contest. And I think that these debates actually help poison the culture. They're not the solution to political violence. They actually contribute to it by the kind of climate of tension that they create, the way they're done right now.
Yeah. No, I mean, not only that, these quote debates and everything you're talking about is incentivized by money and clicks and, I guess, algorithms on social media. And that's why television programs from CNN, Abby Phillips show, which I appear on quite a bit, and Now, Piers Morgan. I mean, Piers Morgan is doing this show. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like 4 people that are all at odds, or too liberal, too conservative, whatever. And they're screaming over each other, and it gets 1 billion views. It's like,
of course it does. Well, look, I mean, this is what Jon Stewart warned about when he confronted, what was it, Tucker back in the day when he was still on CNN doing Crossfire or whatever it was. Was it CNN or whatever it was? Remember, it was Novak. Yeah. It was, yeah. And his whole point was, what are you guys doing? Yeah. How is this healthy? This is hurting. And that was how many years ago? 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. I mean, what we haven't, it's only gotten worse as the algorithms continue to push us just the things that keep our eyes on those pages so that we'll eventually click an ad for some type of supplement that they're hawking, or some kind of really great pillow that you need to sleep on if you want to get a good night's sleep, or whatever it is they're selling you. And I think we're missing the deeper point, which is, if we really want to de-escalate the violent rhetoric and avoid political violence, you can't ever avoid it altogether, but certainly part of it is about humanization. And I can tell you right now, that would be of benefit to people on the right and the left. And nobody is winning in this environment. Nobody is benefiting from this environment. It is intimidating people from speaking out. It is incredibly dangerous and incredibly toxic. And I say that as somebody who, as you know, has been marked for death. I mean, there are 3 people right now in federal custody, 2 of them awaiting trial, one of whom has taken a plea deal waiting for sentencing, who, as you know, marked me for political assassination as part of the Terrorgram Collective international white supremacist terrorist group. Thankfully, this DOJ has not, decided to throw the case out in the name of Nazi free speech. It was originally brought by Biden's DOJ. They're continuing to prosecute it. But knowing of that experience, knowing that there are people out there who want to harm me, who have wanted to harm my family, who have threatened and promised to do so much so that they're actually now going to face consequences for that, I am acutely aware of how incredibly dangerous and destructive this environment is for everyone. I want political violence to stop. I want this level of tension to stop. I want us to be able to talk like adults. But the problem is, if we're going to be insisting on always making the most extreme version of our argument so that it gets the most click, because that's what sells. It's professional wrestling, but with words. If that's what we're going to do, and that's what we're going to think politics is, and it means that people like Charlie Kirk are going to make the most extreme version of his sexist argument. It isn't just going to be like garden variety sexism. Right, it's got to be, Taylor, submit to your husband. You're not in charge. Or it can't just be, gosh, I'm opposed to affirmative action, and here's 3 sort of good academic reasons, sort of like what the Supreme Court gives, when they're opposed to it. They don't decide to like mock black women with a mock black accent. They don't turn to their colleagues who are Ketanji Brown Jackson. They don't turn to Ketanji Brown Jackson and say, joke about her not really being qualified, right? They make some semi-erudite, I think bullshit, but still semi-erudite argument, right? But who wants to read that? Who wants to read a Supreme Court opinion? Who wants to read an op-ed? We want to see Charlie Kirk mock the accent of Sheila Jackson Lee. We want to see him make fun of Ketanji Brown Jackson, mispronouncing her name and smearing her qualifications, even though any objective analysis that's been done will indicate that Ketanji Brown Jackson at the time of her nomination was more qualified in terms of her legal experience and accomplishment than any justice currently on the court at the time of their nomination. People don't know that, and they hear Charlie Kirk talk about how, oh my God, she's clearly doesn't have the brain capacity to serve. Lauren Boebert said that, famous possessor of a GED, saying that Ketanji Brown Jackson is ignorant and unqualified to sit on the court, right? Because that's the thing that's what sells. That's what gets people to listen, is let me just make the most outrageous comment. And I'll be honest, there are times when those of us on the left also make ridiculously extreme versions of what we're trying to say because we're trying to get clicks too. There were people in the aftermath of the killing of Charlie Kirk that I think said much more aggressively sort of gross things, semi-celebrating it. Now, these were not any like relevant people on the left. There was no prominent person on the left who did this. But yeah, were there some like TikTok kids who decided to do that and some Tumblr teens or whatever? Yeah, there were people that went on social media and did that because their prefrontal cortex is not, fully developed yet, and they thought to themselves, oh, I'm just going to say the most outrageous thing possible because it'll get clicks. People do that. People, assholes do that, whether it's on the right or the left, or people who aren't even that political. What we need is to incentivize something different, to incentivize not the 30-second so-and-so owns so-and-so clip or the 2-minute YouTube video. We've got to get back to actually talking to people about how to examine information, how to deal with nuance. And I don't know how to do that. I wish I did. I think the dialogue is one, but you know, we're culturally, we're well beyond what I'm talking about right now. And we need to pull back.
Culturally, and I just have to say again, technologically.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like, I have been talking to you now for about 35 minutes, and I've got one more big question for you at least. And I'm sitting here listening to your nuanced, thoughtful explanations, and this is not what the people want. If you could bring it down to a TikTok, 1 minute, you know, and that's what kind of goes viral, or conflict and so on. So it's like, I appreciate what you're saying and what your hope would be for our dialogue, and who's having it and who's qualified and how it goes. But I fear that the incentives aren't in line with that, which is why I'm not nearly as well known as plenty of other people who are in the same lane. But let me ask you about one other really, I think, important discussion that people are, or debate that people are having or saying, Tim, rather, that Charlie Kirk was a free speech warrior, and he would have been upset with the censorship that the federal government, that the Trump administration is now using as a result, or using his death to cramp down on. And there are also just these boilerplate criticisms. Now you don't like cancel culture when it's done to your guy. And so I thought maybe we could get kind of the nuance between what happened when Roseanne was fired from her ABC sitcom for what she said versus what happened with Kimmel on the same network, or with Bill Maher on the same network. So I think there's a lot of nuance that is required there. But first, to, you know, Charlie Kirk, he was a free speech warrior. You kind of weighed in on that with the criticism of the debate, but was he consistent? Because what I'm hearing a lot of people say is, I'm for free speech when it's mine and not yours. I thought what we were supposed to, I was raised to think that we were supposed to support the speech that we hate as well.
Right. Well, first off, he was not a supporter of free speech on principle, because all during the course of the both the first Trump administration, especially near the end, when the ban on critical race theory was put in place for the last few months of the Trump administration, then all through the 4 years of Biden, when 20 some odd states were banning the teaching of accurate history about racism in America, when they were removing books from the shelves of libraries, both in schools and public libraries, around issues of sexuality or racial justice, including children's books on Martin Luther King Jr., et cetera. He didn't say anything. When Donald Trump came back and passed executive orders to essentially, again, not only take books and curriculum out of schools that he found insufficiently patriotic, but then starting to attack museums, wanting to remove artifacts of history that tell the truth about enslavement, because it makes slavery, what did Trump say? It just talks about how bad slavery was, as if that's a horrible thing to do in a museum that talks about that, among other aspects of Black folks' existence in this country. Charlie Kirk never said, "Oh, Mr. President, you're going too far with this. Is censorship. This is censorship of history. This is against free speech." He had no problem with that. He himself started the professor watch list, the whole point of which was to rat out your professor for saying anything in class that was insufficiently conservative or progressive. And if you did it, they would record your lecture, and they would upload snips of that, and they would talk about how hard, and they would get these professors harassed. Many of them got death threats. Some were I don't know if anyone was fired. I wouldn't be surprised if they were, but they were certainly threatened with disciplinary action. So you don't do that if you believe in free speech. As far as the stuff about cancel culture goes, I think first, most of us,
I just want to add one thing, Tim. In my own personal experience, in our school district, Turning Point USA was fully invested. They were there handing out buttons. Students were student representatives. And it's a little bit more convoluted than even what you just said, the strategies. They were there to support a lie in my town. So they what's it called? They platform and echo and boost the lie, and then it gets everywhere, and they brand it, and they add their resources to it, their editing skills, and so on. And my district was all over the country on their channels, and I was targeted. So it's far more than that. I mean, Turning Point is involved in almost every district in the country.
Right.
And I should mention, and I'll let you know about this great new nonprofit that has been created to combat the Moms for Liberty, which, by the way, in my town was run by dudes. Ironic that they're so anti-trans.
Well, it's like Blacks for Trump is a bunch of white people. You know, if you see the pictures, they've got the old white folks at the convention that said Blacks for Trump. It was, you know, I don't know what that is. But,
anyway, I interrupted you. I just wanted to add that's another tactic that they were using, Turning Point, to silence people's speech. But I don't know where you were there.
People don't realize Turning Point. We hear about them going to colleges, but they're actually more prevalent and more prominent in high school spaces, from what I understand, than even on college campuses. And so they're really in the minds and the heads of 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. Yep. And if there were any left-wing organization, and look, I wish we had the money and the capacity to have the influence that they've got. I you know, hats off to your ability to go get rich white dudes to give you dough, bro. You did it, you know. But the thing is,
though, it's different. Even if we had the money and the capacity, I think what they're doing and the way that they do it and who they attract, it's a bunch of white Christian types, and we're but sorry.
No, I understand. What I'm saying is that their ability to do that, if we even tried to do that, if some left-leaning organization had that kind of presence in K-12 space, you would have the Moms for Liberty folks, you would have these right-wing groups demanding that we not be allowed access to their children because they're trying to raise their children with a certain set of beliefs, and how dare you expose them to these other beliefs, because that's what they're doing in the classroom. That's why they're removing the textbooks they don't like, because they believe that they have an inherent right to keep their children from being exposed to anything, science, history, or literature that offends their particularly precious sensibilities. So they don't believe in free speech. They would never have allowed us the level of influence that they themselves obtained, right. Even if it was, you know, even if it wasn't just George Soros giving us all those big checks that we get, even if it was just some organic, you know, growth of our influence in those spaces. Yeah, they don't believe in free speech. Charlie Kirk didn't send me a message when the Naval Academy banned 4 of my books on the order of Pete Hegseth, making me the most banned author at the Naval Academy until that was, I guess, not too long ago, reversed. He didn't send me a letter saying, "I'm so sorry, man. This is really unfair. I'm going to talk to Pete about this." Hell no, I didn't care about that. These people don't believe in free speech, and they do believe deeply in canceling people who disagree with them. Yes. Those of us on the left always were talking about consequence culture. That was our argument. We weren't saying that people were irredeemable. We were saying that if you say racist, foul stuff and you put your shit in the street, as we say down south, we have the right to point out the shit and let the chips fall where they may. And if we point out the shit that you took in the street, and then someone decides, God, you know, I don't think I want the street shitter working for me anymore, that's their choice. That's fine. What we didn't do was get the head of the FCC to try to get people taken off the air. Keep in mind, when Roseanne Barr was fired, she was, well, first of all, she was let go during the Trump administration. So she was not pushed out by someone. She wasn't pushed out by Obama, even though I think she misremembers it as having been Obama because she's too high or too whatever she is. So she keeps blaming it on that, because what she did, for those who don't recall, is she made a horribly racist comment about Valerie Jarrett, who is indeed a friend of the Obamas, as if somehow that's why she lost her job. But that was a decision ABC made for pure market reasons. And you know what? This is the dirty little secret. So was the initial firing of Kimmel and the rehiring of Kimmel. What people need to understand is corporate media conglomerates don't give a damn about politics 99 times out of 100. What they respond to are financial incentives. And what the Trump administration did in the manner of a mob family, right, was to essentially threaten the broadcast networks with revocation of their licenses, with Brendan Carr saying, "We can do it the hard way or the soft way," right? and you know, it's a nice little network you got there. It'd be a shame if you lost it. You know, and so you threaten And then, of course, if you're ABC, think about, I mean, I'm not trying to excuse what they did by firing Jimmy, but think about it. They're sitting there thinking, holy shit, man, I got the government saying they're going to cancel our license. Our stock is going to tank. And then we are subject to shareholder lawsuits because we have a fiduciary obligation to make the most money for the shareholders. So what do? We got to fire him. Now, what did they learn? They learned that after doing that, millions of Americans were like, yeah, no, we're not down with this. Even if we aren't necessarily anti-Trump, we just don't appreciate this level of censorship. We're going to cancel our Disney Plus. We're going to cancel our Hulu. We're not taking our vacation at your parks. And just a little bit of noise in that direction made the executives realize, you know what, maybe we overstepped. That was a financial decision. What this all tells us is that we on the left are going to have to be just as loud and just as willing to boycott and just as willing to remove our money from the places that crap on the Constitution and the principles of the Constitution if we want to get our way. The right is very good at doing that. We used to be good at doing that. We need to get back to doing it because that's the only reason Jimmy's getting his job back. I don't believe for 1 minute that Bob Iger sat down and said, oh, God, you know, it was political. It was a really stupid, boneheaded move. No, he just realized, oh, there's just as much money to be made over here doing this as there was over here doing this. That's why during the racial justice uprising, all these companies were rushing to do all the DEI stuff. You think that was because they suddenly woke up and they were like, oh, white supremacy. How can we be complicit in this any longer? No, it was because they realized we're in a moment that we want to take advantage of. It was cynical as hell, which is why as soon as the political worm turned, what'd they do? They start canceling their DEI positions. They fire people from those jobs. They pull back. They eliminate all their DEI efforts because now the politics were running in the other direction. So if we want these media giants or these corporate giants to do the right thing, don't ever trust them to do it for political reasons of conscience. It's only for reasons of money, which means we have to make them do the right thing. They're not going to do it on their own.
Very well said. And I would just add one thing to what they did to the DEI as a result. Well, we boycotted Target, and that as a reaction was effective. So apparently, right? Like that was a pretty organized boycott, and they apparently lost a lot of money. The CEO resigned as a result of them throwing out their DEI policies. So, you know,
I don't know if they brought them back yet, but I think if the pressure remains, they will begin to learn some lessons. Because look, I mean, the right lost their mind over an old man and a pickle barrel or a cracker barrel or just a barrel. You know, it's a cracker barrel, I realize, but I like to think of it as a pickle barrel because it just seems more country to me. They lost their mind over the cracker sitting at the barrel is what they did. They lost their mind over that. And what did they do? They screamed about it for 5 days. They got this lunatic Robbie Starbuck, not real name, to lead the charge against all the woke companies. And it worked. And now they're getting the old dude back. You know, as I've joked with you before, he's the only person getting the job during the Trump years so far. Everybody else is losing theirs. But Uncle Herschel got his job back, and he's going to get his cholesterol-filled breakfast because the right wing decided this is a hill we'll die on. And a lot of times, those of us who are progressive, we've forgotten the power that our money does in fact have. Not just George Soros's money, our money, the money that we spend every day. And it's time to just start withholding support from these companies that won't do the right thing. There are more of us than there are of them. I know it's intimidating to watch that stadium filled with 90,000 people or whatever, but you know, we're a 345 million person country, and 90,000 is a lot. It's more than you or I are going to have at our memorial service.
Don't know.
Probably. But maybe if they do, maybe if we die together, we might be able to get 90,000 people.
I hope I die in your arms in a volcanic.
Oh my God, we could only wish. We could only hope. But it's more than most people are going to have at their memorial. But let's be honest, right? This is not indicative of. They want us to think that this is indicative of a national trend. They want us to believe that everybody feels that way. But let's remember that the majority of Americans, between those who didn't vote for Donald Trump and all of this nonsense, and those who just didn't vote at all, the majority of Americans have never, ever given their assent and ratification to the bullshit that is happening. And if we can remember that, then we don't have to feel so alone, you know?
So well said. And I've never felt better about not being compromised with ads. So go support independent folks as much as you can. And that's the only way I can get to Tim. And I can't thank you enough for joining me today. As always, everybody go support Tim. Anything to plug other than the norms that I will hit on the way out, sir?
No, just I would go to my Medium page, the social media stuff, obviously, and support the work of the African American Policy Forum, where I work as senior fellow. We're going to be coming out with a new report very shortly, actually, on the sort of four elements of Donald Trump's anti-blackness, both the rhetorical elements, the public policy elements. So keep an eye open for that. It'll be at aapf.org hopefully within the next week to 2 weeks.
By the way, I saw this headline yesterday that did not get a lot of attention. I did mention it on today's episode of the podcast. I saw it from the New York Times. It was about the New York Times is getting leaks from the federal government's Fair Housing Commission as to basically what the under the Trump administration, what HUD is doing to those policies that were created as anti-discriminatory policies in housing. And when we think about racist policies in America, the way I phrase it, Tim, and I hope it wasn't too bad, is like the white people are locking the black people out. The black people are saying, please let us in. And the white people are saying, no, we don't want to. And I'm saying that's racist. You have to let them in and treat them the same. And it's done by skin color. I mean, there's a long history of this, but to see what the federal government's Housing Urban Development, which is a cabinet level, and they have like billions and billions of dollars that they're responsible for and resource, and they're making it harder for people of color, which is what an entire civil rights movement was fought to create, right? So I don't know if you saw that news or if you wanted to say anything about that. I think I did.
I heard something about it. I haven't read. If you could send me the link, I'd like to read up more on it. But what I do know is it's not a shock that a guy, now our president, who got his start discriminating against black people in housing on behalf of his father and with his father, think it was perfectly appropriate to roll back anti-discrimination protections in housing. It's not at all surprising that he would take a big crap all over the Fair Housing Act, because he and his father certainly never believed in it. He doesn't believe in it. Even though people fought and died for that, it was the last of the three great 1960s era civil rights laws, which made it illegal to discriminate on the basis of race in housing. This is what, this became law the year that I was born. This is not ancient history, although it's early, and I might look like ancient history at this time of the morning. But I can tell you that that was an incredibly important piece of legislation, and it was one that both Democrats and Republicans over the years came to support. In fact, some of the enforcement mechanisms for the Fair Housing Act didn't actually get put into place until the Reagan administration. So think about that. For 20 years, 68 to about 88, there were not enforcement teeth. Those were added in the waning years of the Reagan administration and then the Bush administration. Even Republicans, by and large, were on board. And now we are in a place where they are prepared to scrap all of that, because this is the overthrow of the Second Reconstruction. This is 1877, 1878 all over again, ignoring the progress we've made and trying to essentially roll back the progress we've made to undermine the entire infrastructure of civil rights and equal opportunity. And it's time for us to resist and make this a priority.
Well said. Well said. Yes, I'll send that link to you. Thank you very, very. I've just posted in the comments too, the link as well, if you're watching live, but it's from the New York Times. And thanks to a whistleblower, of course, too, as always is the case, the former director of enforcement in HUD's Fair Housing Office named J.C. Gage quit. And she wrote to Senator Elizabeth Warren to raise alarm about the changes. But like, how would we know this stuff if there wasn't brave people doing the right thing and they go unsupported? Thank you, Tim, as always. Really, really appreciate you joining me today.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching live. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick. I'll talk to you later. And there he goes. Tim hung up. So I'll just keep talking to you. Go read that article, is what I wanted to say. Did it post in the... Oh, here it is. I think that should work. If you're looking at the live chat, if you're listening live, I've just posted that article from the New York Times. Such an important story. I got to do something. Maybe I can get that whistleblower on, but the headline of that article is Trump appointees roll back enforcement of fair housing laws. Tim, another amazing appearance. The guy is so good. Go support him as well right now on Medium. You can support him on Patreon and support the African American Policy Forum. Thank you for supporting me. I really appreciate you being here today, and I can't do it without you. Subscribe Like and subscribe, everybody. Like and subscribe. Seriously, patreon.com/Pete Dominick. That's the place to be. We have an amazing community that's growing. And my goal is to get to 800 paid subscribers. It's 760 right now. I want to get to 800 by the time I turn 50 on Halloween. It's my new campaign. 760 right now. It's $5. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick. There's like 173 people watching. Maybe 2 will sign up. I have these great guests every day and a lot of credibility over years of bringing on these great guests. I book it, I host it, I edit it, I promote it every day. It's a lot of work. I love it, but I can't do it without you. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Bye-bye. Smash like and subscribe.